and today we've come to an absolutely beautiful house.
Edith Sandwell was born in the spring of 1947 in a small town that no longer exists on most modern maps. When she was 8, her parents moved to a cabin on the edge of the woods, but Edith always felt more at home inside the trees than within 4 straight walls. By the time she was 20, she and her husband Joseph had already decided to leave behind the noise of the world. They walked for days into the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest until they found a place that felt still, as Joseph put it. That's where they built their home, not with nails and concrete, but with what the land offered: branches, vines, leaves, and bark. Edith is 78 now, and she still lives in that home, if it can even be called a home in the traditional sense. From the outside, it appears almost mythical. A massive tangle of branches woven together like a bird's nest, rising from the earth in curving shapes and subtle symmetry. Moss grows freely across the exterior. Vines drape over the arched doorframe like velvet curtains. To the untrained eye, it might seem abandoned, something nature had reclaimed long ago. But step inside, and you'll understand. This place isn't neglected. It's alive. There are no smooth surfaces, no plastic containers, no linoleum floors. The ground is layered with compacted leaves and soft bark. The walls breathe with the seasons, cool in summer, warm in winter, as if the house itself understood the rhythms of the forest. There are no electric lights. Instead, filtered daylight pours through intentional gaps between woven branches, casting a patchwork glow across the space. Edith has never cleaned it, not once in 70 years. "I don't need to," she explains, her voice soft and crackled like the bark underfoot. "It's not dirt, it's the forest. This house is part of it. Same as me." Indeed, there's no smell of rot or mold, just earth, pine, and a faint trace of dried lavender hanging in bunches from the ceiling beams. The interior is tidy in its own way. Everything has its place. A wooden basin carved from an old tree trunk, a fire circle edged with river stones, baskets made from woven reeds, filled with dried herbs and foraged roots. Visitors, though rare, are usually stunned. Some leave with tears in their eyes, overcome by the quiet magic of the place. Others leave quickly, unable to process a life so far removed from modernity. But to Edith, it's never been a curiosity. It's just home. The most remarkable corner of the house is a small alcove near what she calls her sitting nook. Here the branches have been subtly etched with carvings, tiny marks barely visible at first glance. When you lean in, you see them: spirals, trees, animals, and words. "Joseph made those," she says, placing a knotted hand on the wall. "He was always better with his hands than I was. Said the wood needed a story." Joseph passed away 32 years ago. A heart attack while foraging by the river. Edith never left the forest. Among the carvings are small phrases, philosophies really, that Joseph etched over their years together. "Grow with the trees. The wind remembers. Home is where the heart rests." Edith never replaced those words with anything new. She didn't need to. They became her compass. She doesn't have running water, but she collects rain through hollowed-out logs. She doesn't have a phone, but she doesn't need one. Occasionally, hikers stumble across her home. Some ask to take photos. She always says no. "You don't capture this place," she says. "You meet it." What surprises people most isn't the house. It's her. Edith moves slowly, but with purpose. Her back is curved, but her hands are strong. Her eyes, clear blue, miss nothing. She reads by candlelight, cooks with fire, and tends to a garden that's part wild, part planned. She speaks with a patience most people lost decades ago. "I never meant to vanish from the world," she once said to a university student who was writing about off-grid living. "I just chose not to follow it." As twilight descends, her house glows in warm golden hues, the forest humming gently around it. In this place, the distinction between home and nature disappears. Edith doesn't live in the forest. She is the forest. The rain had returned, as it often did in early autumn. Thick droplets tapped against the branches that formed the roof of Edith's home, a soft percussion that echoed faintly through the hollow walls. She sat near the fire pit, wrapped in a wool shawl dyed years ago with crushed berries and river mud. A small pot of nettle stew simmered over the coals. The scent was earthy and sharp. Every so often she glanced at the carved wall beside her, the one Joseph had etched with his stories and thoughts. Her fingers traced one of the phrases now softened by time but still legible. "Let the house age like we do." The forest had never been quiet, not truly. Even in solitude there was always movement, the low murmur of wind through the trees, the crunch of deer passing in the distance, the croak of frogs in the nearby creek. Edith had long ago learned how to interpret those sounds like a second language. In the early years after Joseph died, she spoke aloud more often, talking to herself, to the birds, to the trees. It wasn't loneliness exactly. It was the need to hear a voice, even if it was her own. But over time, she grew quieter. The silence between her words stretched, not out of sorrow, but out of acceptance. One morning, nearly 10 years ago, a stranger came. A boy, 15, maybe 16, thin, pale, shoes full of holes. Edith found him curled against the outer wall of her home, unconscious from exhaustion and cold. She had no idea how long he'd been walking. He didn't speak for hours. Edith gave him water, then warm broth, and let him sit by the fire. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wide and frightened. He asked where he was. "The edge of the world," she replied gently. His name was Marcus. He had run away from a foster home 2 counties over. Said he didn't want to go back, that he didn't belong anywhere. Edith listened. She didn't press. She'd always believed people speak more when they're not being questioned. Over the next few days, Marcus helped gather wood, haul water, even mend a cracked wall panel using vines and bark paste. He asked about the carvings. Edith told him stories, not in a dramatic way, but simply and clearly, as though she were reciting facts. Marcus grew quiet when she talked about Joseph. His voice cracked when he finally told her his mother had died 2 years earlier. Edith didn't offer advice. She offered space. He stayed a week. On the last night, he sat by the fire and whispered, "This is the first place that's ever felt safe." The next morning, he was gone. No note, no farewell. Just one small carving added near Joseph's oldest etching. "Thank you for letting me be still." She didn't cry. She smiled. Since then, every year or so, someone finds their way to Edith's home. Some arrive by accident, hikers off course, nature photographers who followed a deer trail too far. Others, she suspects, find her by rumor. There's talk in nearby towns of a woman who lives in a living house, of an old healer who never left the woods. People bring their burdens. Edith never asked them to leave them behind, but somehow they do. One woman, Ruth, came shortly after a divorce. She was 42 and brittle with bitterness. She stayed 3 nights, slept without pills for the first time in years, and left with dirt on her hands and a light in her eyes. A young man named Elliot came during a blizzard. He had been struggling and tried to end his pain, then panicked and ran into the storm. Edith found him half-conscious near the edge of the river and dragged him back, wrapped in layers of furs and leaves. He didn't talk much, just sat and watched the fire day after day. Before he left, he carved something too. Even broken things can glow. Edith never spoke about those visitors unless someone asked. She never called herself a healer. "I don't fix people," she said once. "The forest does." She believed deeply that stillness reveals what noise hides, that most people weren't running from life but from the silence that forced them to face it. And somehow the house never protested. It absorbed stories, grief, healing, and time. The vines stretched around new names. The walls grew heavier with carvings. And yet, like its owner, it remained solid. Not untouched, but unchanged in spirit. Winter had crept in, not with the brutality of northern storms, but with a quiet shift in the air. The leaves had fallen in layers around Edith's home, and a light frost clung to the moss on the outer walls each morning. Her joints ached more than usual, and her steps had grown slower, but she moved with intention. Every morning she gathered dry twigs for fire, checked the rain troughs, and boiled pine needle tea. Her hands, lined and worn, had long since molded into the rhythm of forest life. She didn't resist the cold. She welcomed it. "The forest sleeps," she would say, "and so should we." Inside the home, the fire crackled low and steady. Above it hung dried herbs, their scents mingling with smoke and bark. A woven blanket covered Edith's legs as she sat beside the old alcove, Joseph's wall of carvings. Her fingers traced the words she had read 1,000 times. But this morning she lingered a little longer. There was something in the air, a stillness beyond the usual quiet. That day a knock came. Software unsure, but real. Edith blinked. Visitors were rare in the winter. She reached for her walking stick, stood slowly, and opened the vine-draped entryway. A woman stood there bundled in a patched coat, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes swollen from crying. Mid-30s maybe. Edith didn't need to ask why she was here. The forest always knew when someone needed rest. "Come in," Edith said simply. The woman's name was Laura, a school teacher from a city several hours away. Her voice trembled when she spoke. She'd lost her younger brother in a motorcycle accident 3 months prior, and the grief had swallowed her whole. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. She had simply driven until the road ended, then walked, hoping to outrun the weight in her chest. Edith made tea. Laura cried quietly by the fire, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't ask for comfort, and Edith didn't offer any words. After a while, Laura looked around and whispered, "How do you live like this? Alone?" Edith smiled softly. "I'm not alone." Laura looked at her, confused. "This house," Edith said, touching the walls, "it remembers every voice, every story, every goodbye." Laura stayed 5 days. She swept the leaves from the entry, helped gather kindling, and listened as Edith spoke of the seasons, the wind, the stars. One morning they sat together without speaking for nearly an hour. It was the first time Laura had been able to sit still since the funeral. Before she left, she added a carving next to Joseph's. "Grief doesn't vanish. It just stops shouting." That night, Edith didn't sleep much. The cold had burrowed into her bones. She pulled her shawl tighter and sat beside the fire until sunrise. She knew her time was nearing, not out of fear or illness, just a feeling, a soft whisper in the branches above her bed. She didn't dread it. Over the next few days, she tended to her space with a different kind of care. She reinforced the rain catchers, patched the eastern wall, and set aside dried food in bark containers. She trimmed the wild herbs, organized her bundles of twine and nettles, then for the first time in 70 years, she made a new carving. Just one line, "This home welcomes." And then one morning, Edith didn't rise. She was found days later by a hiker who had been told, somewhere in a cafe near the mountains, about a forest woman in a house made of branches. He wasn't the first to look for her, but he was the one who found her, seated peacefully in her chair by the fire, shawl around her shoulders, eyes closed, hands folded in her lap. He left everything untouched and walked back to town, unsure what else to do. Authorities arrived 2 days later. They expected to find decay, perhaps even danger. Instead, they found warmth. stillness, a kind of reverence. No trash, no rot, just layers of leaves, soft firewood, dried herbs, and the scent of pine and smoke. And dozens of carvings, etched by strangers over decades, each one telling a story of sorrow, healing, or transformation. They didn't dismantle the home. How could they? Word spread, some called it a sanctuary, others a natural monument. Eventually, a footpath was marked, discreetly, and a weathered wooden sign placed near the edge of the trees. Edith's house. No photos, no tours, just silence and respect. Carvings welcome. And they came. Not in crowds, but one by one. People who had heard stories, who had something they needed to leave behind or something they needed to remember. No one ever cleaned it. No one ever changed it. Because Edith had been right all along. It wasn't dirt. It was life. And her home, woven from time, grief, moss, and kindness, remained exactly what she built it to be. A place where the heart could rest.